Welcome to the NatWest ESG Horizons podcast series. In this series, we put a spotlight on our customers, highlighting new sustainability initiatives, opportunities, and perspectives. And in doing so, we hope to inform and inspire you, broadening your ESG horizon. For episode 2 of ESG Horizons, we're very pleased to be joined by Robert Gordon and Sam Robinson from Hitachi Capital UK. Robert Gordon is the CEO and Sam Robinson is Deputy Treasurer. Hitachi Capital UK is one of the UK's leading providers of innovative financial solutions for retail, motor, business and consumers. In this episode, we'll be discussing how Hitachi Capital UK are driving the transition to clean transportation, particularly through their partnership with GRIDSERVE. Let's begin with, Robert, can you explain to listeners how Hitachi Capital UK is driving the transition to clean transportation?
Our strategy over the last few years has been driven really by the demand from our customers to help them decarbonise their fleets. That's be it large commercial fleets, including vans, or just simply fleets of cars. So over the last few years, we've run a number of pilots for a lot of our larger customers. And what's been absolutely incredible is the change has been very beneficial because we can quickly demonstrate to our customers the running costs are lower, maintenance and downtime is significantly reduced. And the really big bonus is the battery life of electric vehicles is far better than we ever imagined. We've been involved in the government's Optimised Prime project, which is a study of the effect of electric vehicles in the grid. So that's given us a bit of an inroads into seeing, imagining what the future is going to look like. And you really can't advise customers to take action if you don't do it yourself. And it's been remarkable. The number of questions we get. So what are you driving? What's your fleet? What's the Hitachi Capital fleet look like? And that's just a frequent question. So, we have a battery electric vehicle only policy. We are moving from a fleet of nearly 100% of diesel, and now we're down to our last 39 diesel cars. So the runoff will happen, but we've adopted electric vehicles. It's the only way to really learn, to get in there, drive it yourself, and you can tell others about your experience, and you develop knowledge by driving an electric vehicle. So we're seeking to become a market leader in the adoption of electric vehicles. Leasing really enables users to immediately benefit from the whole of life lower cost of any electric vehicle. Maintenance costs are lower, residuals are strong, and that results in a good rental for these vehicles. So it's a great way to own. Supporting the charging infrastructure, that became very apparent that was needed. It's also key that infrastructure is supplied with sustainable energy to charge those vehicles. Otherwise, what's the point of migrating to electric vehicles? You really need to have sustainable energy being used and charged in those vehicles to get the maximum benefit of adoption.
Excellent. Thank you, Robert. And I like what you say about practicing what you preach. And that's often within NatWest how we think about the pillars of our strategy as well. Part of it is being sustainable, right? Own operations, branch network, our staff, and the other part is facilitating sustainability. What are we doing with our clients to help them in their transition? You spoke about imagining the future, and certainly one vision of the future is everyone owning an electric car or at least a clean form of transportation. Excuse the pun, but what are the roadblocks at the moment to achieving that future?
Well, the roadblocks are significant in owning an electric vehicle. People look at the cost. So initially, the cost is higher. There are subsidies for that. Having a charger at home, again, not everyone has off-street parking. 40% of the population don't have off-street parking. And then lastly, range anxiety is a significant problem. When can I charge my car? People are more worried about in the days when I used to drive a fuel car, you'd run it down to almost empty and you're always confident you get that extra 20 or 30 miles and you haven't got the experience of doing that in an electric vehicle. And then when you get to the charging network, is that charger going to be working? Is it going to be able to handshake with my vehicle? And there's so much that have been written about people when they've failed to charge their electric vehicle. Because it's new, people naturally have range anxiety.
It's a great point, and I think one that's often not quite appreciated. There's a lot of focus on new, very attractive looking electric vehicle models and designs. What people don't always think about, like you say, is then the plumbing, right?
Yeah.
Improving the charging infrastructure so that real issue of range anxiety, whether that's psychological or whether that's reality, is overcome. I spoke at the outset about GRIDSERVE, and perhaps we'll turn to that now. Can you talk us through GRIDSERVE and the role it can play in solving this challenge, and particularly around range anxiety?
Yeah, no, GRIDSERVE has been a very key partner for us. I mean, we could have taken the position and let's just wait. I mean, battery technology is going to get better. Ranges on models are now getting over 300 miles, some are up to 400 miles. So yeah, let's just wait. Or we could take the position that we needed to be involved in the grid. So being involved in the government's Optimised Prime project, made it very apparent that the effect of electric vehicles on the grid is going to be huge. If everyone moved to EV tomorrow, there's not enough capacity in the grid or charging infrastructure to cope with that move. So if you have an EV strategy and you're going to be helping your customers, it's absolutely vital that we are involved in moving the charging infrastructure ahead and the supply of energy to that charging infrastructure. So GRIDSERVE really fascinated me. When I first met them years ago, they had a philosophy, and apologies for how I say this, but I'm saying wheel like a wheel on a car, but they had a sun to wheel concept. A bit like the old concept with oil-based cars was well to wheel, where you're putting petrol into cars. But the sun to wheel was amazing because that was a complete philosophy that you're capturing sunlight, solar power, and supplying that energy and charging cars. So it is complete life cycle into the cars, which seemed to me to be that philosophy was clean, it was sustainable, and there wasn't any, well, we hope those electrons are coming from sustainable energy, not from burning fossil fuel. Absolutely brilliant. And then also getting involved in the charging infrastructure, when it hits you that 40% of drivers don't have off-street parking or access to an off-street parking to get a charger, then you think, this is not going to be equitable. It's not going to enable everyone to own an electric vehicle. So having a good, reliable, high-speed charging network, absolutely key. So we invested in GRIDSERVE right from the beginning. We've provided funding for the development of solar farms. So that's the first part, the sun. We've funded the world's first dedicated electric forecourt in Braintree, Essex. And that's there with 36 chargers. It's absolutely 100% dedicated to electric vehicles, has a driver education section, coffee there, you can do some shopping and learn about electric vehicles. So they welcome ICE cars, that's internal combustion cars, because you can go down there and find out about electric cars, take a test drive, how is it going to work for you, what's the range, what you need. We also help them invest their initial investment in the electric highway. Now that is a network of electric charging stations at the motorway service areas that covers 80% of the UK's strategic road network. We're funding the replacement of those chargers on the highway with the deployment of rapid contactless payment charging at a fair and reasonable cost, because that's really important. That concept was very ingrained throughout GRIDSERVE, that customer service philosophy, giving customers a valuable service. We also supply vehicles for leasing with GRIDSERVE, so they can give that education down at the Braintree Centre. And people can sign up for an electric vehicle. They're a broker to us, and we supply the electric vehicle. So it's an all-round package. We're investing in all parts of it. And in the future, we've got massive plans in the future for depot charging, for our major corporate customers, and a network for commercial vehicle charging, because that's often forgotten. Electric vehicles will be big in commercial vehicles, and having a network of charging infrastructure for them is also key. Also more solar farms and hubs. So a lot planned in the future. It's huge.
Yeah, that sounds very multifaceted. And I like what you said at the outset, Robert, how you see your responsibility not purely around the product you provide, but really thinking about the whole value chain when it comes to clean transportation and really solving that full value chain and dealing with the bottlenecks as you've identified with the charging station. I think that holistic approach is one that certainly a lot of ESG investors are expecting from companies in terms of the horizon and scope they look at when it comes to their sustainability ambitions. Sam, turning to you, we spoke a lot now about the asset side, the investment side. Maybe we go to the other side here of the balance sheet and speak a little bit about liabilities. And I think you've taken a very clear view around these new investments being best financed with a green instrument, right? You've set up a green financing framework that's linked to EV leases. It's linked to some of the GRIDSERVE investments as well. You're one of the first in your sector to have gone down that road. What have been your experience thus far?
Thanks for that, Arthur. So for any of your listeners that are unaware, the green financing framework or green bond framework is basically a document that just sets out what our kind of terms are for raising green bonds. So it'll state what the eligible projects or assets are that we're going to finance and use the proceeds for. It'll show how we're going to manage the process of doing that, of that green financing. And then it shows also what reporting we'll do upon what the impact of those projects will be. So really showing investors what their money is going towards. Producing the framework was quite intimidating at first. It was something in Treasury it's not our expertise. We haven't worked in sustainability. We haven't trained in sustainability. So that was quite an intimidating process. But we've really appreciated the help we've received from NatWest Markets and some of the other experts at the banks that we had to learn about this. And now it's a really kind of good, clear document about exactly what we're going to do. It communicates very clearly to investors how we're going to finance this and exactly how the process will be. And it's also internally a really clear document for just saying, right, this is the terms of how we're going to operate. And we're not going to be applying some projects to ESG that aren't, or green financing that isn't sort of purely in line with this framework.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Sam. And I think that's a very good cue for me to do a shameless plug that having a bank as a structuring advisor when you're first going down this route it can be very, very beneficial. Starting from scratch in an ever-evolving space such as sustainable finance is typically unadvisable to get you into suboptimal outcomes. So indeed, working with one of your trusted banking partners can get you a framework that's sort of truly optimized for investor expectations. And one of the, I think, noteworthy features of your framework, Sam, is that you were also one of the first corporates to embed elements of the EU taxonomy. So the EU's guidebook for sustainable activities within the framework. What have been the benefits and any challenges as well, I guess, of doing that?
Thanks, Arthur. So again, I guess it's quite intimidating learning about an entirely new area like the EU taxonomy and kind of learning about all the different elements to it, especially when it's the first time you've sort of looked at these things. You're not that familiar with green bonds, but we've had some really good advice on that. And it's been a good framework, really, and it's been a good step along the journey that we've been on to learn more about green financing and climate change solutions in general, because it's a very complex area and there's a big risk that certain greenwashing is happening and certain projects are marketed to investors, and actually there's a risk that there's more harm being done than there is good, or there's a significant amount of harm. So examples of that can be ecological impacts of certain projects. Like if you were to do a solar project and you were to basically tarmac over greenbelt land, that could have certain impacts on floodplains. Or if you were to do wind turbines, they potentially where they're placed could have an impact on the natural ecosystem. So whether that be fish or whether that be birds being killed by wind turbines or things like that. So these things are all quite complex. Another issue is things like solar panels. If they're not disposed of properly at the end of life, there's potentially toxic chemicals that can be released into the environment. So the taxonomy is a really useful tool to kind of understand a bit better and give investors those assurances that actually what they're investing is a pure EV and there's not kind of massive environmental risks that are exposed to it. So it's been very interesting for us because we've suddenly had to go away and start talking to our suppliers about, do they do environmental audits? Have they got certain assurances that projects aren't doing any significant harm? Do they have circular economy plans? So after the project's over, is there a plan or a means to recycle or properly dismantle projects rather than seeing big waste going into the landfill? So learning about all those sort of things has been really interesting for us, and it's also kind of hopefully given investors that assurance that we are doing the right thing, and what is in our framework and what we're financing for is a really pure, environmentally friendly product and sustainable product, rather than something that's actually, it looks sustainable on the outside, but actually it's causing potentially some harm to the environment.
So I like how you've phrased that, Sam, that the taxonomy can be a very helpful tool in supporting, I guess, rigorous analysis of the environmental impacts of the projects you're undertaking. And this concept of do no significant harm, I think, is particularly valuable in analysis. Right? You can have one environmental objective, but it shouldn't be going at the expense of other environmental priorities. And I think, like you say, the taxonomy is a very helpful tool for that. So to your point, you've set the framework, you've issued, I think, several green finance instruments now. So that I think that's helped channel money towards GRIDSERVE. And on that point, Robert, turning it back to you, GRIDSERVE, and it's been in implementation, as you say, it involves a lot of different ambitious targets. And what have been the learnings thus far in supporting GRIDSERVE?
Multiple learning, really. It's hard to know where to start, but I suppose when selecting a partner and working with them, the philosophy of that company does it align with your philosophy, and having a partner that customer experience is everything to that business is absolutely key. So that's enabled us to work well together. GRIDSERVE is so focused on the customer experience. You know, one of the lowest prices of providing charging to EVs, deploying a rapid charging network, and the technology to utilize small grid connections in very remote places with batteries is absolutely phenomenal, because that will give us the ability to install and provide services in areas that previously would have been considered impossible, and it won't need the funding from then the support. So, one of the most important bits about GRIDSERVE is it's all designed to be non-subsidized. It's designed to be profitable, and that's important. I know profit's a bit of a dirty word sometimes, but to do this type of business profitably makes it happen, makes it take off, makes it sustainable. Also, the plans for the future. Batteries. What are we going to do with the future? And being GRIDSERVE, servicing the grid, containerizing those batteries and using them to service the grid and provide frequency response, etc. in the future. Absolutely brilliant plans. So there's not a big supply of used batteries at this stage because electric vehicles are fairly new, but having plans, considering them, and having the infrastructure and the ability to utilize them in the future, I think is really key. And perhaps one of the last lessons that we probably learned by having a sustainable, really doing it, not just measuring ESG, but actually really going out and doing something, producing something. You get the plaudits from when we're issuing, talking to investors. Gosh, these are really dark green investments. You're at the leading edge of producing something dark green, and the unintended consequence of it all has been, it's been incredibly engaging for our staff, because when you're in a finance company, you're financing lots of assets, but actually if you're financing assets that change behavior and improve things, that's engaging, because it gives people at Hitachi that sense of purpose. We're helping move things quicker, and that's incredibly engaging, which is it gives the company a feel-good factor. So, and there's not a lot of that around at the moment. So to have a feel-good factor in a company, and you're financing something that is really, Toddington, the CEO of GRIDSERVE, always says, my objective is to move the needle on climate change. If we can help them move the needle on climate change, that's pretty amazing. And it's not just, it's real business. It's providing a real service, and it's engaging, it's fun. and it's also not subsidised. It can make profits in the long term. So very exciting business.
I think that's very well put, Robert. And on your point about lack of subsidy, it's certainly been argued that some of the larger EV manufacturers have benefited, right, from various local international subsidy regimes. But equally, we're starting to see that greener technologies, green forms of energy are becoming more self-sufficient from a financial sustainability point of view. How do you see that the investment case here developing in the coming years? Do you think it'll become easier for more such schemes to be profitable?
Yes, I mean, subsidies are important sometimes to make changes, and when you haven't got economies of scale, they're needed. So definitely to sometimes start some new technologies and move them ahead, it will be. But yeah, the subsidies, we've seen subsidies in certain areas, but they need to actually contract and disappear. So yeah, some of the profits are not as high, and obviously it's a high amount of capital going into the projects at the start, and it relies on a lot of growth. But we are seeing the growth. 40% of our pipeline of new business is EV, so it's really happening. And you're seeing the investment from the motor manufacturers investing in EV. I mean, that's all they're talking about, bringing on the new models. So it is happening. Investment's happening. Yes, there have been some subsidies, but that was needed to kickstart. Things get more efficient. Battery, the range becomes greater. The price of electric vehicles is slowly coming down. So yeah, the need for subsidies in the future shouldn't be there, because this should be sustainable financially, but occasionally you do need it to start it. And the businesses are not as profitable in the future, but it's the look through to the long term. And the long term, this has to happen. This revolution is happening, and probably it's gained pace at a greater rate than I imagined pre-COVID. Maybe in COVID, it's people have thought about the environment a little bit more, thought about their options and what can they do to contribute, and what's the next car going to be. So they've got time to think about electric vehicle rather than an internal combustion engine vehicle. So it's been a rapid period of change, which is faster than I imagined. But when you look at it in terms of climate change, probably not fast enough. We need to move quicker. We need to do more, and a lot of activities happening, but more all the time. And if it is sustainable and it is financially beneficial, then then it will happen even at a greater pace.
Yeah, well, not the right metaphor. The way you described it, it certainly sounds like it's been in fifth gear. The developments that are happening in this space. And Sam, Robert has spoken about some of the objectives and looking ahead when it comes to the partnership within the investment in GRIDSERVE. Perhaps turning it now to the green finance framework again and some of the objectives there. How do you see green finance play a role in your wider treasury strategy in the years ahead?
Yeah, thanks for that, Arthur. So I think there's three impacts really on us from a treasury point of view, three main impacts. And the first of those is every time we speak to investors now, whether it be at roadshows or more ad hoc updates, we're expecting there to be environmental questions. So that wasn't something that we really saw 5 years ago. It was all questions about us as an entity and us as our credit. But now there's always an element where we're expecting it to be some sort of question on our ESG or sustainability strategy. So we really have to be aware of what's going on and be aware of any risks in the organization from that point of view. The second is that we're expecting obviously to do more green bonds in the future. We're hoping that will tick up, and we have to keep a track on how our green assets develop and how we're writing more new sustainable business, and how that will facilitate more green bond financing. We guess we'll see perhaps in 10 years' time, we might look at it and almost all of our bonds will be green bonds. We'll see how that progresses. And the third impact is that Treasury now has to have a presence internally on all these committees, whether it be the CSR committee or the sustainability committee. We really have to be looking at what's going on internally and representing our investor and our stakeholders' interests. So we obviously talked about the EU taxonomy. It's important to make sure we're not watering that down, and we're considering if we're adding new projects to the framework, what is the impact on that? Is there are the things like circular economy, is that being considered? Have we done assessments to make sure there's no significant harm happening and that sort of thing? So we generally just have to become more aware of what's going on internally and be trying to feed back the external stakeholder and investor sentiment back internally and be a representative for that.
Thank you very much, Sam. I think we've covered a lot of ground, but I cannot stop the podcast without resorting to a question about your own EV preferences. As Robert mentioned at the outset, that is a question you get a lot in terms of your own choice of cars. And Robert, Sam, I have to ask, we're in the run to Christmas here. Will Santa be bringing an electric vehicle to your chimney, or are you already happy owners of EVs?
Is that a question to me? If so, I mean, I actually drive an electric car at the moment, so I've leased a car from Hitachi Capital. So I'm one of those 40% of road users that doesn't have off-street parking. I park in the street, but I still manage to use an electric vehicle, which is a bit more challenging. But during lockdown, I've been downloaded the Zap Map app, and I've created a spreadsheet of all different chargers in the area and how much it is, pence per kilowatt hour. So no, I've managed, and I've been very happy with my electric vehicle. I'm not looking to upgrade anytime soon.
How about you, Robert? What's been your electric vehicle?
I've been driving electric vehicles. No, I've been driving electric vehicles for a long time now. So hybrids and now pure electric. So, and yeah, also I was not in the company car scheme, but it's very attractive to go back into the company car scheme with a pure electric vehicle. So they make sense, and they're good fun. It's enjoyable driving other passengers around, especially going to play golf and the look of horror. Oh my God, I don't think I've got enough charge. So that's always quite an amusing trick to play, especially if the opposition are in the car. But no, I mean, it's a great experience, and everyone always remarks how quiet it is and how smooth the ride is. So you have to drive them to experience them. And I was definitely, a very petrol head. I did like V12s, V8s, and etc., and had them for many years. And you once you drive electric, you don't go back. And I don't have the joy of going to a petrol station anymore and smelling all the petrol. And occasionally, if I have to go with someone, the smell is overwhelming. So you change so quickly. It's an incredible transition, and it's well worth the effort. It takes a little bit of time to get used to, but once you've got your routes and you know where your charging stations are, I have got home charging. If I make sure I plug it in around about midnight, and it's fully charged in the morning. So it's just a few more things in your routine to do, but I never have to go to a petrol station. So that's perfect.
Excellent. It sounds like you've fully embraced and embedded the new habits associated with owning an electric.
And you have too, from our discussions. You can push yourself. Yeah.
I'm one of the, I think it's 60%, right? That does have off-street parking. So I'm part of that percentage. Very fortunate to be. Great, Sam, Robert. It's been a pleasure having you on the podcast. We covered a lot of ground. I'll just want to highlight a couple of things that I took away from our conversation. I think one is the importance of dealing with range anxiety when it comes to the transition to clean transportation. I think the other one, as a company, to be an ESG leader, not just thinking about your own product, thinking about the wider value chain. The other piece, taxonomies, using them, EU, UK taxonomy, using these as a tool in assessing the investments that you're making. And I think the final point I have to flag, what Robert has highlighted, some of these climate investments and projects can make both commercial sense, but actually there's a real feel-good factor as well for your employees, for your staff, when you get involved with them. Thank you again for the conversation. Thank you for listening to the ESG Horizons podcast series. We hope you found this episode informative. We very much welcome your feedback and questions. Please email us at sustainablefinance@natwestmarkets.com.